Hello everyone, this is part 11 of What If Naruto Was the Perfect Shinobi, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, to share, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Join my membership, the perks are great. It's in the description. Be sure to like and subscribe, it gives me more motivation. Enjoy. Kiba looked about in both directions as his clawed hands dug into a thick limb upon the bestial Inuzuka's landing, smelling the blood and tangible danger in the air as he bounded onto the next tree. The rugged genin was using his Shikyaku no Jutsu to maneuver through the darkening woods at top speed. Kiba's canine inclinations granted him a certain keen animalistic sixth sense about some things, and that intuition was now telling him that his squad leader was waist-deep in somewhere close. Slow it down a little, Kiba. It's downright exhausting trying to keep up with you. The bestial shinobi let out a little smirk, baring his sharp canines as his kunoichi teammate landed on the same branch, panting a little. Ino had made some notable SK improvements during the last 6 months, but her physical stamina still needed serious work. He could have taunted her, but he was more worried about the alpha at the moment. Yeah, even he could be serious when he had to. The 3 Naruto clones that the Teiko had made earlier landed on other limbs with identical cold, emotionless expressions. Telling these doppelgangers what to do was as close as Kiba was ever gonna get to being able to boss Naruto around, so he decided to take advantage. We're getting real close now though, Ino. I can almost smell Naruto. Ino crossed her arms and glanced away, not pleased with Kiba's sudden rescue plan. This is not a smart idea. Naruto-kun asked us to let him handle this, whatever it is. Kiba tried to resist the urge to roll his eyes as he moved on. Ino was a nice girl, but all the hero-worshipping got real annoying sometimes. First it had been the Uchiha, and then she'd abandoned him and moved on to Naruto not long ago. At least the Teiko was a better choice than Pissy Pants Sasuke, but the Inuzuka doubted that the lone Uzumaki much appreciated the attention even though he tolerated it without complaint. Naruto could be a miserable old bastard like that. Kiba would be all over something like a cute girl idolizing him. The animal user could sorta understand the girl's position this time though, as Naruto didn't tend to be one to rush into things. But still, something wasn't right about this. That stubborn prick would never admit needing help, and he was acting weird earlier. She thought about it a moment as she stopped moving, tapping her chin with a nod. You know, he was. He seemed almost resigned to something when we were attacked. Resigned and kinda distracted, too. Deep down inside, Kiba knew that whatever that could bother the ever so unshakable Uzumaki Naruto, like what he'd seen earlier, was something that the young genin had no business messing around with. The leader didn't show anything, but an Inuzuka's senses were hard to trick. Despite all that, Kiba had something serious to prove here, and that was enough to counterbalance his reservations. The time had come to show Naruto that he wasn't some little kid who needed to be protected all the time. The canine shinobi could almost guess the blonde's shocked expression when he was the one being rescued. Damn it, there's blood everywhere in these woods. He'd better not have gotten hurt. Yamanaka Ino rolled her eyes, like what he'd said was the most obvious thing ever. Well, there are almost 100 genin out maiming each other. I'll bet you don't even know where you're going. Kiba scowled. Now that was downright insulting. To tell a proud Inuzuka that he had no clue what he was tracking, she might as well have called him a useless S. This was what his clan did better than anyone else, period. Damn loudmouthed bimbo. Too bad all women couldn't be nice like Sensei, though Naruto once said that Kurenai could be scary as all hell when she gets mad. Like he'd even been around her enough to know. I'm not tracking his blood, idiot. I had a Kamaru take a leak on his boots when he wasn't paying attention. I'm trailing that scent. The dog trainer's pointed smirk returned as Ino scrunched up in distaste. Akamaru yipped at her with a mocking bark as well, as the pair started moving through the dense woods again. Good thing he had such a good nose, since it'd be dark soon and his eyes would be useless. Okay, asshole, here I come. I'll show you how much stronger I've gotten this time. Uzumaki Naruto glanced down at the double-edged elongated blade impaled through his chest with a disbelieving expression and then back over at Orochimaru. The pallid snake Sannin had since adopted a somewhat repentant look, now realizing that he had no doubt killed his intended convert on accident. That is, until the younger shinobi met his eyes with a blank stare and exploded into an insect cloud. Orochimaru had precious little time to register his surprise as the bugs began crawling up his extended blade in an attempt to attack him, even more so due to what was now taking place behind his position. Kaiten, Hausenka no Jutsu. In the tree standing atop his planted Zanbatsu, the real Naruto was no less surprised than his opponent when a second Naruto appeared through the thick underbrush and ran at Orochimaru in the Sannin's blind side and then exploded into a Kikaichu cloud upon being impaled with that exotic blade he wielded. And then one Uchiha Sasuke leapt out through the trees with his Sharingan blazing, making rapid seals and unleashing a Kaiten attack. Naruto didn't know whether to be pissed that Team Kakashi had the sheer gall to meddle in his battle or relieved to have some much-needed assistance, as he was well along the path to being beaten and killed on his own. TSK, such insubordinate genin, disregarding a superior's direct orders. Orochimaru observed the insects crawling along his blade with a dark amused chuckle and seemed to concentrate additional chakra into the sword, and in response it began glowing with a visible bluish-white aura that incinerated the approaching Kikai bugs into ash. The snake Sannin then turned to meet Sasuke's assault, using his chakra-charged sword to S apart the individual blazing bursts as they came, batting the shuriken concealed inside towards the prone Anko with a sinister gleam in his yellow eyes. Naruto bit out a curse and wrenched his Zanbatsu loose with his one good arm. Another instance where all that weight training was showing its use, he could now heave the oversized cleaver with one arm, though the motion tended to be awkward and slow. Kaiten, Gukakyu no Jutsu. Sasuke landed to Orochimaru's other side and spewed the Uchiha trademark Grand Fireball at the Sannin as the serpentine criminal redirected the last blazing shuriken. Naruto couldn't help being a little bit impressed with the Sharingan wielder's insight, as Sasuke made the snake Sannin abandon his position and leap aside. His advantage didn't last long at all though, as Orochimaru closed in and began slicing and sabbing at the Uchiha with his glowing sword, not giving Sasuke enough time to even think about countering as he backpedaled and the insane Sannin pushed him towards the trees. Meanwhile the wounded Naruto landed back on the ground a suitable distance between Anko and the incoming throwing stars. Raiten, Saiteki na Karada. For a supposed useless technique, the blonde mused that this one was getting some serious usage in his more recent skirmishes. Naruto held the Zanbatsu perpendicular to his torso and allowed the static charge to course through him and into the steel cleaver. Kubakiri Haucho thus became an improvised magnet, and the shuriken were attracted towards and clung against the blade. The demon carrier had developed this little trick whilst sparring against Tenten one morning when he was about to be bludgeoned with her blunted practice kunai. The blonde cancelled the technique and the shuriken clattered away onto the earth en masse, their sharp points embedding into the moss cover. Naruto winced as he saw more blood pooling on the ground near Anko. A quick inspection revealed that the magnetic pull had about dislodged the kunai thrust into her side, and now there was even less time to preserve her. Naruto scooped up a couple loose shuriken. Well then, I guess it's time to remove the kid gloves. What a pain in the ass. The blonde disappeared in a visible red swirl, concentrating his Kyuubi chakra to use his own variation on the Shunshin no Jutsu, the Akuma Shunshin. The transport technique hurt like hell without the demon's cooperation, as he had precious little red chakra to draw upon under those conditions. Yondaim's seal always leaked some demon chakra into Naruto's special tenketsu due to its design, but it wasn't much. He reappeared well across the clearing on the same branch where Haruno and Aburame were observing Sasuke's struggle against Orochimaru with cleaver in hand. He did remember that Sakura had done well on the basic medical exercises given at the academy. She was no medic nin, but still more than capable enough to treat AS wound. Sakura, go and tend to Anko-san's wounds while I help Sasuke. Shino, you get the comm. Radio inside her trench coat and call in an Anbu distress signal. Tell him to send in all available units as soon as possible. Anko might or might not have called in backup earlier, but better to be certain than S. Shino nodded and disappeared with the body flicker technique. Sakura hesitated a moment as she stared at the blonde but then seemed to snap back into sense and departed as well. A good thing, as he would have gutted Haruno alive and roasted her entrails had his sensei bled to death due to the girl's indecisiveness. Naruto was the highest-ranked shinobi present in the technical sense, so it was his place to give orders. The blonde again used his demon flicker technique once the two genin were gone and appeared behind Orochimaru and Sasuke, where the Sannin was still taking swipes at the Uchiha with his sword. The snake Sannin noticed him at once and drove the young Sharingan user back into a tree trunk with a quick thrust kick, then redirecting his complete attention onto Naruto with a maniacal leer as Orochimaru licked his lips. "I'd thought you might have taken your chance to escape, Naruto-kun. Kukukukuku." Sasuke glared up at his rival with a contemptuous expression but said nothing. Even the hard-headed Uchiha seemed to comprehend that the two prodigies needed to work together this time. That didn't mean that he was pleased with the situation, though. Naruto paid no particular attention to the Avenger and instead attacked Orochimaru as he channeled chakra into his arms and cleaver and heaved the Zanbatsu, ignoring the Sannin's blatant taunt. Had he thought about it, he might indeed have considered taking Anko and retreating even though it would have been a most dishonorable thing to do. Orochimaru would have pursued regardless, he was certain. The mad shinobi leapt back and avoided the initial sideways hack. Naruto then raised the blade overhead and spun the steel Zanbatsu in a circle with both hands to build momentum prior to chopping down into the ground in a bid to divide the snake Sannin in two. "This entire battle is pointless. You're the one who should be leaving, Orochimaru." Orochimaru's lips curled into his usual sneer as the chakra-charged Zanbatsu cut into the earth, splitting the ground and creating a small explosion. The actual attack didn't connect but the resulting shockwave was enough to stun the snake Sannin a moment. During that second Sasuke sprung back into action and slugged the madman in the stomach with all his strength. Orochimaru hissed in annoyance as Naruto gripped his Zanbatsu again and brought the blade to bear in an upward swing designed to decapitate the yellow-eyed man, but the diabolical shinobi managed to block with his own glowing weapon. The Uchiha pressed his attack with a second punch, but Orochimaru caught the incoming attack with his other hand and twisted downwards, hyperextending the smaller genin's arm as Sasuke grimaced in pain. The snake Sannin's eyes traveled to where Sakura and Shino were going about their respective tasks and the Oto leader glared in apparent disapproval at seeing what they were doing. "You're violating the rules, Naruto-kun. I'll not tolerate such blatant insolence." The blonde remembered that time he'd battled Anko to become her apprentice all those months ago. She too had imposed certain rules on the battle, and he'd ignored the regulations on that occasion as well. And now he stood against Anko's sensei, staring hard into those malicious yellow eyes through the crossed blades in an even slock, the two so close that the depraved serpent creature's acrid breath tickled the QB container's whisker marks. Naruto spanned the same response he'd used during that match. "There are no rules in combat. All that matters is winning." Orochimaru hummed in obvious amusement and drilled the blonde in the breadbasket with a hard thrust kick as he had Sasuke earlier, though Naruto's armor dulled the impact to a minor ache. He stuck his cleaver into the ground to halt his backward skid as the snake Sannin's long tongue darted out and wrapped around the Uchiha's trapped arm right above the elbow. Orochimaru hurled Sasuke into Naruto at a high speed, releasing his hold on the raven-haired shinobi. The collision sent both Anbu and Genin sprawling down and their opponent sent his tongue around his long blade's handle and swallowed the weapon back inside him whence it had come, leaving both hands loose. The snake Sannin then bit down into his lip and smeared blood onto his thumb, coating the summoner's tattoo on his pale arm in crimson as he sealed and slammed both palms onto the ground. Kuchio's no jutsu. The normal smoke cloud appeared, revealing two enormous serpents when it dissipated moments later. The snakes were about the same build and breed as those that had attacked Naruto and his teammates earlier on. The twin reptiles sheared away towards Haruno and Aburame and the still unconscious Anko in unison on obvious attack orders. The blonde didn't intervene, trusting that Shino was scared enough to handle a couple mindless summons, instead tossing the 3 shuriken he had grabbed earlier as Orochimaru carried out his summoning while making his own hand seals as he stood on a branch. The sun was in complete recession at this point and the remaining dark orange light was almost unable to penetrate through the treetops. Shuriken Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. Naruto's 3 throwing stars then multiplied into several hundred lethal missiles that soared through the night air towards the Sannin's exposed back. Orochimaru's serpentine head whipped about in an instant as he heard the incoming shuriken. The twisted shinobi used a rapid kawarimi and several dozen metal stars embedded into a log, the others sticking into the various trees near the snake-like man and the moss on the ground. The blonde was somehow pleased that he'd at least managed to make Orochimaru use an escape technique once during their battle. Sensing someone's eyes on him, Naruto glanced over to a higher branch to see Sasuke staring down at him with a smug expression. The demon container realized with more than a little indignation that the opportunistic little S had copied his technique with his Sharingan. You and your team shouldn't have gotten involved in this. The Uchiha smirked with his usual attitude, and Naruto much desired to kick his teeth in. No one's going to take you out except me, Uzumaki. I'm not giving you any excuses. To be willing to risk his death over something so trivial, Sasuke's arrogance knew no limitations. Naruto leapt over onto the Sharingan wielder's branch to avoid the hailing kunai that then rained down on his previous position. The high vantage point allowed him to see developments elsewhere. Shino was having a hard time against Orochimaru's minions. His Kikaichu were able to consume chakra, but the great summoned serpents contained so much raw chakra that draining them was a methodical process. Meanwhile, both snakes were striking at the insect user and keeping him on the run. Naruto ran a hand along the deep wound on his arm and smeared the blood over his own tattoo. Kuchio's no jutsu. A third snake appeared through a smoke cloud, though the blonde summon was somewhat smaller than the demented Sannin's pair. Nonetheless, the undersized serpent advanced against Orochimaru's two without the least hesitation, and seemed to be quicker than the yellow-eyed man's hulking reptiles. The sneering Orochimaru then somehow materialized through the ground below them. Sasuke observed Naruto with a guarded expression, now seeming to understand that he had no clue as to the blonde's actual strength and SK. A genin executing high-end summons was almost unprecedented, and a clan heir like the Uchiha no doubt knew what Manda's mark represented on some level. Not that Naruto was a genin now, but Sasuke didn't know. You cannot escape me, Naruto-kun. The snake Sannin's tongue lashed out and extended, wrapping twice around the branch on which young Shinobi stood next to the tree's trunk. Orochimaru yanked back and the wooden appendage snapped loose, causing both occupants to abandon their perch and move in opposing directions. The madman tossed the broken branch at Sasuke, who dodged and moved into another tree, and returned to attacking Naruto with taijutsu. The snake man struck the blonde with lightning-quick punches and kicks, with the Kyuubi container managing to evade and attempt to counter without much success here and there. He stuck his Zanbatsu into the ground and elected to use his hands, as the cleaver was much too slow against the snake Sannin's unarmed quickness. Whenever he would direct chakra into his muscles to increase his speed and strength, Orochimaru would then augment his own game in accordance and remain every bit as unreachable. The pale shinobi's eyes seemed to glow with repressed delight whenever the spiky blonde pushed his attacks another level. He grinned as he eyed Naruto's bloodstained snake summon tattoo. I wasn't aware that you bore Manda's mark. You continue to surpass expectations. Naruto took a rasping breath and spoke with a slight snarl. All this being patronized was beginning to rouse his temper. Though he couldn't tell it, the demon container's eyes glowed crimson a moment, then reverting back to the usual pale blue. The deranged genius raised his black eyebrows in response. You haven't even seen anything yet. Orochimaru swayed to avoid an incoming punch and slammed into the blonde's end with a reverse elbow strike. The snake Sannin grabbed Naruto's hair and wrenched the blonde spikes back, leaning down to whisper into his ear as he pressed the demon vessel's cheek into a tree. The blonde could have vomited when the evil man's tongue slid out and trailed along the outside, coating it with saliva as he trailed his hand through Naruto's hair. Then illuminate me. Make me see everything, Naruto-kun. Kukaku. It'll be a pleasure. Naruto tensed his arm and elbowed Orochimaru in the stomach, whirling around in an attempt to slam him in the chest with a palm thrust while reaching to his waist with his other arm. The Sannin caught the incoming blow, but with his hands occupied was unable to counter when Naruto tossed his last remaining stored scroll, activating the device to release its contents as he threw it at the serpent man. The undeclared ANBU's weighted trench coat slammed into Orochimaru and covered his head and upper body, blinding the snake Sannin and staggering him back a couple steps as he released Naruto's hair, pulling out several blonde strands in the process. The malevolent criminal recovered his balance and tossed the imbued garment aside within seconds, but the blonde's diversion had still bought the time needed to complete his next technique. Doton, Doryu Tiger. A deep mud river appeared below Orochimaru, causing the Sannin to sink down to his knees as the current rushed him along through the ground at high speed. Sandaime could immerse a person clear to their end with this technique, but Naruto had neither the power nor the experience behind it to replicate the Hokage. The river intersected a tree across the clearing, and the snake Sannin was slammed into the trunk as the cascading mud held him in place. Naruto glanced aside as he sensed several chakra sources closing in on their location, 3 being the exact same and the other 2 somewhat stronger. Orochimaru pulled one leg loose onto dry land as he glared at Naruto through narrowed eyes. 3 large windmill shuriken with steel wires attached sailed past the tree where the mad Sannin was still trapped, then looping back around the tree several times and binding Orochimaru tight as the weapons embedded into the trunk behind him. The snake man thrashed and struggled against the binds, but even with all his SK he was unable to make his escape. Naruto trailed the wires to their source as he landed behind them, and took the opening to make a snide remark. A tree and metal wiring, this must bring back some pleasant memories. And we even have the mud again. Sasuke glowered as he pulled the wires taut, holding one set in each hand and the last in his mouth and being unable to snap out a retort due to the latter condition. The Uchiha had used his Sharingan to manipulate the wires holding the shuriken with her SK that would make most puppet users envious. An impressive execution, Naruto would give credit where credit was due, and in more ways than one. Sasuke seemed to know without having to be told that the blonde's intention had been to bind Orochimaru in place and had acted to support the initiative on his own. Without the Uchiha's help, the serpent would no doubt have escaped the mud river and this attack would have been rendered null. Naruto retrieved his coat and scroll and again stored the trench, then closing the area between him and the snake Sannin using the Akuma Shunshin once more. Orochimaru, you wanted to see my powers, let them be the last thing you'll ever see. The blonde closed his eyes and clenched his hand and raised his arm parallel to his body, watching with morbid interest as 6 snake heads protruded outward through his wrist and came to rest against his skin. These weren't the usual shadow snakes, instead containing a distinct reddish tint. 6 snakes were the maximum that he could create with the regular Senejashu. Naruto pointed his clenched hand at the trapped Orochimaru, tensing the appendage like a claw as the red serpents attacked as one. The Sannin seed his head in puzzlement when the snakes didn't rush to the K, instead spreading out in various directions and arching back, resulting in their heads all pointing at him through various angles several meters removed, but none touching or biting into the pale shinobi. Orochimaru's yellow gaze ventured among the various snakes as their mouths opened wide in synchronization. Flames began coalescing within the snake's open maws and the Sannin's eyes widened and his own mouth slacked open in a disbelieving expression. No, this cannot be, such a technique shouldn't be. Ninpu, Seiryuyashu. Fire spewed out in 6 massive constant streams, each one with about the same strength as a grand fireball. The intense heat and light was enough to illuminate the entire area and make Naruto avert his eyes. The technique, combining the snake hand with a high-octane Kaiten technique, was the blonde's greatest original creation and his biggest trump card save the Kyuubi. The biggest drawback was that it consumed chakra in ridiculous amounts due to having to channel it through the snakes and then release it. Even now as Orochimaru shrieked and the tree he was attached to was set ablaze along with several others around it, the attack burning gaping holes through the trunk and spreading all over the grove. Naruto was having trouble keeping the assault doing due to the strain on his tenketsu. But he decided to raise the ante regardless, determined that this attack would mark the end. The blazing streams changed to a white color and became even more intense as he pumped all the chakra that he could bear into the assault. Naruto didn't cease the hellish onslaught until he saw the ashes pooling on the ground where Orochimaru had been bound. The Sannin's agonized screams had long since ceased. Uzumaki-san, perhaps that was somewhat excessive. Naruto smirked as the smoke cleared, ignoring Aberrane Shino's quiet comment. The tree was charred black and ashes dropped loose in various spots. His accomplishment turned to sheer hopelessness when he saw what remained slumped on the ground against the blackened trunk. All that he could see was hardened and scorched earth, in an almost humanoid lump. Even the steel shuriken had melted into liquid along with the wiring. The demon container knew what he was seeing. Tsuchi Bunshin no Jutsu, a mud clone. Almost all his chakra and his best technique, wasted on a clone. All that work and he hadn't even touched the real Orochimaru, who was no doubt preparing to counterattack and crush Naruto and the others even at that same moment. Shino was right. The blonde had acted in rash excess in his zeal to guarantee AK and now his inner reservoir was almost depleted, as though he could have neutralized an opponent as scared as Orochimaru. The mere thought bordered on ridiculousness. Well, the Sharingan isn't detecting his chakra anywhere here, seems like he ran. Naruto exhaled, not quite believing Sasuke as he leaned against a less burned tree trunk and caught his breath. No, he was certain that Orochimaru was still lurking about somewhere. The blonde still had a little gas remaining in the tank, but rather hoped that his battle was over. The Sharingan wielder deactivated his dojutsu and moved back over to his teammates. Naruto's own teammates would be arriving in a moment as well, it seemed, even though he had told them both to remain behind earlier. 2 genin and 3 identical clones, these approaching newcomers had to be them. Rather than worrying about that, he decided to survey the damage at his present location. All the summoned snakes were down, though Naruto's had taken the most damage. Aburame was a little roughed up but otherwise unharmed. The blonde walked past him with a nod over to Anko. She's breathing a little easier now and I stopped the blood loss. She should survive. Naruto looked down to where Sakura was wrapping some additional medicated bandages around Anko's rib area, the serpent Kunoichi's blood drenching the girl's hands and wrists and staining her red training dress. Some smeared her brow as well. Haruno almost looked like a new person like this, her visage set in something resembling determination. Hell, she talked to Naruto without stuttering, which was odd enough. You did well, Haruno. Thank you. She still needs to be taken to the hospital, though. Something large twitched in Naruto's peripheral vision and his blonde head snapped to the source. Orochimaru's 2 summoned snakes weren't as he'd thought them to be. And that wasn't all that he noticed as both beasts began twitching and their eyes snapped open. Those strange black markings, similar to the ones that had covered Anko as she had lost consciousness earlier on, were now spreading all over the twin serpents as well. The summoned pair snapped back into action at once, moving at twice the speed as earlier as though the grievous wounds incurred in their previous battle were non-existent. Those markings seemed to augment power and quickness, whatever they were. Shino was the nearest target. One enhanced snake bashed the insect user high into the air with its enormous angular head, and the other then set him back into the ground with a similar motion. The Aburame landed hard on his back atop the hard tree roots near him with a sickening crack and sank into unconsciousness. Damn that coward, leaving his summons behind to do his work. Naruto shook his head at Sasuke's impetuousness as the Uchiha engaged the 2 snakes. At least he had proven to be some use this time. The Sharingan wielder dodged the initial lunging bite but was pushed back hard when the other snake charged into him. Sasuke reactivated his dojutsu and managed to avoid the tail whipping down at him. One snake pursued as the raven-haired genin attempted to create some distance, while the other moved to attack Naruto and Sakura, who were both standing in the same area. Here we go again, bothersome. Naruto scooped Anko into his arms and moved into the distance as Sakura dodged in the opposite direction. The attacking snake crashed headlong into the tree and plowed straight through, severing the trunk and sending the top tumbling down on a collision course with the unconscious Aburame Shino. The blonde cursed as he expended his precious little chakra, using the snake hand to wrap around the dropping trunk and pull it aside and then using the cage bunchen to create a clone to extricate Shino. Both the real Naruto and the created clone carried their respective quarries over to a less dangerous spot, taking special care to avoid stepping on the innumerable shuriken embedded all over the ground thanks to the blonde's earlier attack. Meanwhile Sasuke was managing to dodge the large reptilian predator's attacks but had little time to counterattack even with the Sharingan active. Kaiten, Hausenka no Jutsu. An unpleasant stench assaulted Naruto's nostrils as Sasuke's blazing attacks struck his summoned reptilian pursuer, burning into the oversized snake's skin and tissue. The Uchiha's assault did little to stop the relentless reptile, however, and the genin was made to cease the attack in order to avoid a venomous bite. The other snake was occupied with chasing Haruno through the trees as the pink-haired Kunoichi moved through the branches. Lacking its earlier momentum, the serpent could no longer break the trees down and thus its pursuit was hampered enough that Sakura was able to avoid becoming its next meal. Naruto stared down at the load in his arms and was both amused and embarrassed at once to note that he was holding his attractive leather and net-clad sensei bridal style. Somehow Anko's arm had ended up wrapped around his en. Perhaps it was a good thing that she was unconscious, as the consequences would no doubt have been most agonizing otherwise. Gatsuga. The blonde pushed his thoughts about Anko aside as he watched 2 grayish blurs barreled into the tattooed snake attacking Sasuke, tearing into its skin. The 2B continued moving and hitting the gigantic serpent again and again, tearing noticeable lacerations into its charred and weakened skin as the rapid movements kicked up dust around the snake. Orochimaru's summon thrashed about with wild movements. And still the monster continued with its mindless attack, impossible to deter and seeming to be unresponsive to pain, as though the creature had no living will other than to accomplish its master's cruel intentions at all costs. The snake's massive tail whipped its attackers as both landed and the wild swing connected. Kiba and Kiba both skidded along the ground. One Kiba exploded in smoke to reveal Akamaru, and both mutts clambered aside to avoid the snake's next charge. Sasuke seemed to be almost exhausted in his own right and was content to allow the newly arrived Inuzuka to pick up the slack. Fing snakes have got to go. I've about had it. Come on Akamaru, let's hit this S. Kiba's loud swearing seemed to have some meaning to his canine partner, as Akamaru ran about to pincer the snake. Naruto had no clue what the mutt was planning but resolved to at least prepare to render whatever limited help he could at that point. The blonde knew that he had no chance against those summons now, and had never thought that the moment would come where he'd be depending on that loud mongrel to save his skin. Naruto gave his existing clone a silent directive, and the doppelganger grabbed Kubikiri Haucho, which was still stuck in the ground, and tossed it to his creator as the genuine article placed Anko on the moss. Meanwhile, Akamaru scaled up a tree trunk in order to gain some height and then leapt away towards the massive serpent. Naruto raised an eyebrow, thinking that this was the ultimate in uselessness. Rather than clawing or biting, Akamaru turned in midair and urinated in the thing's massive SI. The snake hissed in literal irritation and snapped at the little dog, but missed as the animal landed on the ground and scampered back to Kiba. Alright, good shot, boy. Now we've got him. Jinju Konbi Henge, Saotoro. A smoke cloud appeared that was so large that Naruto believed that Kiba had somehow pulled his own high-level summoning at the beginning, but what he saw once it cleared was more impressive still. Kiba and Akamaru were gone, and in their place was a massive canine beast with two heads, comparable in size to their reptilian opponent. The snake didn't even pause to consider the new development, striking at the enormous white beast at once. The massive hellhound leapt aside and struck back with a piercing howl. The attack was so quick that Naruto couldn't even see it, and Sasuke seemed to squint even with his Sharingan active. The results were as clear as the Hokage monument. Orochimaru's snake exploded in two at the waist, blood and gore spraying out everywhere as the animal tore through it with a devastating Chuga attack. The two serpent pieces wreathed and as the two-headed dog was coated a deep crimson with its blood, a true Akamaru. Naruto's eyes were wide at the destruction as the beast roared its dominance with both heads so that all the accursed wood might hear. Kiba, you've gotten much stronger. I wonder what else you've learned. The sentiment didn't last, something that seemed to be a recurring theme in this prolonged nightmare scene. Haruno tumbled back into the wooded clearing with the second unharmed cursed snake in hot pursuit. The augmented Kiba turned to attack the snake with a growl, again using the Chuga. This time its aim was nowhere even close and the creature created a massive crater several meters to the snake's right side. Orochimaru's remaining minions seemed to accept the challenge and lunged at the mammoth canine. The blood-stained hellhound raised a claw to swipe at the incoming serpent, but the snake twisted aside and underneath the beast, coiling around Kiba and squeezing in an attempt to crush him to death. The bestial dog grunted and bit down with both heads into the constricting serpent, drawing yet more blood. The snake hissed but showed no other reaction as it moved to reciprocate the gesture, raising its angular tattooed head to sink its poison teeth into its bound target. Kiba, I'm coming. The serpent then threw its head back in pain as another arrival leapt onto its back and sank a blade deep into its en. Yamanaka rode the massive summon like a horse as she wrenched Naruto's ninjato deeper into the snake. The creature grimaced in pain again when a somewhat recharged Uchiha Sasuke added to the combination assault and plunged two kunai to the hilt in its yellowed stomach. Sakura plunged her own shinobi knives into the great reptile's side, grunting in exasperation when it continued struggling. Two last kunai into its other side as a now again conscious Shino gave his all, Kikai bugs marching through his skin pores to cover the reptile. The snake opened its mouth wide and almost screamed in an enraged hiss but still remained strong. Kiba, Akamaru, Ino, Sasuke, Shino and Sakura all combined weren't enough to K the monster. And so Naruto prepared to take his turn. The blonde knew that there was one principal method to K a snake. Take its head. This is all I can do to help now, all my remaining chakra into this king strike. Naruto closed his eyes and dug deeper into his chakra well than he ever had, concentrating everything he had into his zanbatsu in order to attack and cleave that snake's head. The blonde raised the giant blade overhead but then dropped it, sinking to his knees as blinding pain erupted in his en. The stored chakra detonated in the air with a loud boom as the cleaver dropped, blasting a deep wound into Naruto's side as he moved his head in an almost detached manner to stare at his en. The blonde nuzzled against something silky and black, and pale as well, at last meeting Yellow's eyes. Orochimaru's whitened teeth were sunk deep into the demon carrier's en, blood leaking out as something else sinister streamed in. The snake Sannin released his bite as his extended en returned to where the man stood several meters behind Naruto in his blind side. Orochimaru, you. All Naruto could do at that point was watch. Something was gushing through his bloodstream and tenketsu, recharging his reservoir with chakra that wasn't his own. Never had he experienced a sensation quite like it. Had he more experience with alcoholic beverage, he might describe it as being akin to violent intoxication. Unbridled rage seemed to taint his core being, not the cold anger that the blonde was acclimated to. I've blessed you, my special seal, Naruto-kun. You have proven worthy. This sensation, I've never. Orochimaru's eyes were wide and alive with excitement as a sneer twisted his visage. This is nothing at all. I can give you so much more. Soon, you will come to my side. The anger had taken root, but somehow Orochimaru wasn't the target. The demon vessel wasn't even paying attention to the snake man now. Raw might seemed to be supercharging every cell in Naruto's body and every chakra pore in his skin, and he liked it. Not even when he gave control over to the demon had he experienced such euphoria. The blonde was seeing red in his vision as the whole world swirled around him. And yet his senses were sharper than ever. Power, power, this power is, error. Naruto returned upright and threw his arms out as the new 3-tomo mark that had materialized on his end began glowing a bright red. Like Anko and the snakes, odd markings began spreading over the blonde skin. Except his didn't cool and change to a blackened color, instead remaining the same violent magma red. Fingers elongated into razor-sharp claws. Fangs grew out where teeth had been and blue eyes changed red as all his existing wounds healed over in seconds. Except this time, the Kyuubi wasn't giving power on a volunteer basis, as its vessel could sense due to the demon's indignant crashing and roaring inside his mind. Naruto paid the Kitsune no concern either. Inconceivable, an immediate assimilation, perhaps it is due to the Shishufuan. Orochimaru had taken a tentative step back when Naruto rose again, seeming to expect something else, but he soon mastered his hesitation and was now observing his newest experiment with morbid interest. The cursed blonde then began glowing with chakra, a strange deep purple power radiating along him in a twisted double helix. Naruto knew that something malicious was pulling on his consciousness, and it was growing stronger and harder to ignore as this new river rushed deeper and greater. Hey, with strength like this, I could. Orochimaru's voice whispered into Naruto's ear. There was something almost intoxicating about the man's dulcet tones now, though on some level the blonde knew that he was betraying both Anko-sensei and Sandaime-sama due to even thinking a positive thought about the depraved Sannin. The malevolent but somehow not wholly unwelcome pulse pounding through him seemed to beat in synchronization with the snake Sannin's presence. Anything you desire could be yours, Naruto-kun. For now, perhaps one last trial. The snake man made a single hand seal, and his serpent summon began glowing with the same dark chakra as Naruto. The serpent threw its head back with a hiss, tossing Ino high through the air. Yamanaka landed on her rear as the serpent both coiled tighter around Kiba and swung its head at Sasuke at the same moment. Uchiha was knocked back several meters but regained his balance while Kiba's synthesis with Akamaru ended and both man and dog twitched in pain on the ground. The hyper-empowered serpent shrugged Sakura and Shino loose with ease and stared at the Juin-driven Uzumaki Naruto along with the assorted genin. The blonde sneered, not his own but one identical to the evil shinobi standing behind him. Kakukaku, K the snake, Naruto-kun. Prove your dominance to me. Quote. Naruto said nothing as he rushed at his opponent, hunched over like an animal as he charged at a blinding speed. He had needed all his willpower not to kneel to the man and address him as Orochimaru-sama. All that anger would be taken out on this vile serpent. The disgusting creature that had harmed his precious people, dared to tempt his wrath so. The snake seed its head back in a challenging manner, and Naruto sprang at it without even considering the matter, sinking his clawed hand into the monster's tea and plunging through to his knuckles. The cursed demon carrier tore along the summoned snake's entire underbelly with a cruel grin, shredding through rough snakeskin and sinewy coiling muscle as though both were mere scroll paper. Chakra explosions rocked the reptile's interior as Naruto's darkness unleashed within it. The snake exploded into pieces, raining blood and gore and venom down all over the entire clearing. Naruto turned back to where Orochimaru stood, but the snake Sannin was gone. NNN Naruto-kun. The blonde surveyed the scene around him, struggling with a certain strange emptiness within him now that Orochimaru was no longer around. Instead he turned his attention towards a trembling Ino, who almost seemed to be in tears due to Naruto's current condition. Perhaps his appearance revolted her. He took a step towards the girl, and she took a trembling step back in response. Sakura was likewise pale and wide-eyed. Sasuke hid his intimidation well, but the blonde could almost smell it on him. Shino was reserved as always, never one to make a hasty analysis. Perhaps Naruto had become a real monster. Everything's okay now, Ino. Our enemies are gone. I wouldn't let them hurt you and I'll kill anyone who tries with this power. Kiba struggled back to a standing position and grabbed the blonde's shoulders, shaking him as though attempting to drive out some evil apparition. Naruto, snap out of this, man. Whatever this is, it ain't you. Come back to us. Naruto stared into his oldest chum's eyes with that same cold sneer. Kiba, it's nothing. This is great, I've never been so alive. You don't understand. And then something even stranger happened. Something coiled around Naruto's ankles and spread up his legs, rooting him to the spot. In a literal sense, as he discovered upon glancing down. Living roots were coiling along him like yet more snakes. The blonde had believed that such SKS had been lost with the Shodai Hokage, the man who had used them to create Konohagakure no Sato. But now was no time to dwell in old stories like so. Naruto scowled and struggled against his wooden bonds, but to no avail. Several masked shinobi began appearing in the clearing, some on the ground and others in the trees. They were mere shadows, the crescent moon overhead and smoldering wood around the clearing providing but minimal light. Stand down, rookies. This one's dangerous. Naruto's red eyes stared at the speaking Anbu. How typical, the proverbial cavalry showing moments too late to do anything except persecute him. The dark rage that had burned through him when he received Orochimaru's mark coursed through him again. I see how this deal's going to go down, then. Too late to complete the mission, but right on time to end the demon brat. Do your worst, assholes. Come on then, don't make me wait all night. Give me an even shot and I'll shred you swine into bacon, I swear it. The Anbu captain who seemed to be in command stepped over to Naruto and stared into his eyes. The blonde could see through the man's mask that his eyes didn't seem to be unkind or hold sinister intent. Naruto bared his pointed teeth at the man nonetheless. Kiba and the other genin seemed perplexed at the term, demon brat, but the blonde paid them no heed at the moment. Don't be ridiculous, Uzumaki-kun. No one here's going to attack you. Naruto spat upon the ANBU's mask with a snarl. Bulls, I'll bet your subordinates are itching to sheathe those katana inside me. The man closed his eyes and sighed, remaining stoic despite the blonde's insolence. The beast's taint is clouding your senses. Allow me to clear away the haze. The Anbu began sealing, and Naruto braced to weather the coming attack. Hokage Shiki Jijin Jutsu, Kakuen Nitten Sushu. Hokage, this man was no Hokage. A strange seal appeared on the Anbu captain's palm. The man pressed the hand against Naruto and the two became somehow linked with a chakra stream. Naruto closed his eyes as the sensations burning within him began to subside. His hands and teeth and eyes returned to normal and the red tattoos receded back into the throbbing mark on his N. A certain clear calm spread over Naruto as he opened his eyes again, back to the usual blue. The demon vessel noticed that he was now standing inside some odd wooden structure as the binding roots began to retreat back into the ground, and that he was sweating all over and his muscles ached. Arigato, I think I'm back to normal now. The Anbu let out a tight smile as Kiba smirked, pleased to see the old Naruto back. You're most welcome. Now, I'll be bringing you all to report to Hokage-sama. Among the 6 genin, none argued the point. Naruto had expected this development and perhaps the others thought the same or were too exhausted to think. A subordinate Anbu did comment, though, a woman with long violet hair. The demon container meanwhile withdrew and donned his coat in a vain attempt to cover Orochimaru's curse, as though not seeing were not thinking. The weight sagged down on his exhausted limbs, but he didn't much care at that point. Yamato-san, Teiko, perhaps we shouldn't ignore the Chunin exam regulations. The man named Yamato turned to his squad member and shook his masked head. Naruto understood what the kunoichi had been saying. They were all still candidates in the exam and shouldn't be given an Anbu escort to the tower, which was where the blonde knew Sarutobi to be at present. The blonde trudged over to retrieve and store his Zanbatsu as various Anbu surveyed the area. There were about a dozen in all. Even Orochimaru would not have been able to stand against such a group, especially since their commander seemed to be able to wield lost Mokuton techniques. Hokage-sama has given me instructions, and I intend to see him through. Given the circumstances, I agree with his decision. Naruto took a deep breath as he walked back over to this Yamato character. He didn't know what to think about these events. On one hand, all Anko was alive and seemed to be more slay than when he'd arrived much earlier. He'd battled against Orochimaru and lived to tell, and both his team and Team 7 were all alive and in decent condition. That alone was a small miracle. On the other hand, he had been branded with some wicked curse mark, and Yamanaka at least thought him to be some monster once again. Think Sasuke had stolen his technique, he recalled with a snort. At least it hadn't been a good one. He had behaved like some berserk animal towards the same people he'd soon be working alongside in Anbu, not a good impression at all. And his own mission was compromised, as Gaara was no doubt long since through the exam now. Yamato-san, please send someone to take Mitarashi-san to the hospital. The Anbu captain nodded and directed two random subordinates to take the still unconscious Anko to obtain medical attention. Let's move out. Back to the tower, team. Rookies, remain together behind me. Naruto didn't look at his teammates or anybody else as he obeyed. One last thought ran through his mind as the large group departed back into the deep dark woods towards the central tower. Orochimaru, what a strange guy he was. That will be all for this video. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment down below for more videos. Goodbye.